Sure, it's Russian troops that launched an unprovoked invasion, but it's the West that started the war in Ukraine. That's the oft-repeated line spun again this Monday at a summit in China by Vladimir Putin. Repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. So the saying goes. But for Putin, this founding myth story is no myth at all. Tried and true Kremlinologists insist the seemingly jaded and cynical ex-KGB agent genuinely feels grievance, genuinely believes in Greater Russia's manifest destiny, a right to expand steeped in nostalgia and mysticism. After a summer of chatter over hypothetical direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks, we'll ask about the mindset in Moscow and elsewhere across the 11 time zones of the Russian Federation, about the real-life death and destruction raining down on Ukraine, and about a United States whose mixed messages, critics say, embolden all those in the West who buy Putin's line. Today in the France 24 debate, why Putin won't relent. With us from Geneva, he was a Russian diplomat who quit his post over the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Boris Bondarev, author in German of Ministry of Lies. Thank you for being with us here.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
France 24, former Moscow correspondent Elena Voloshin, author in French of Propaganda, Vladimir Putin's Weapon of War. Good to see you. European correspondent for Newsmax, Craig Kapitas, author in English of Bear Hunting with the Politburo. How are you?
Okay.
And Manlio Graziano, geopolitical analyst, author of What is a Border? Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Reminder that if you're on the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Let's begin with that all-important question. Does Jude Law make a convincing Vladimir Putin? The English actor, the star of the screen adaptation of the best-selling Giulia Di Empoli novel, The Wizard of the Kremlin, the film premiering at the Venice Film Festival Sunday. In it, the central character is not Putin, but a fictional advisor called Vadim Baranov, a character inspired by real-life political strategist Vladislav Surkov, who accompanied the Russian president in his rise and consolidation of power. Elena Voloshin, a movie you will see?
I was afraid you would be asking me about The Wizard of Kremlin. Obviously, I haven't seen the movie. I've read the book.
It's not out here yet, so
I don't want to lose people who
has.
like me, so maybe I won't make it. Well, it's a great fiction. It's a good fiction, but...
But this concept, and I'll put it to you and also to Boris Bondarev, about how important the propaganda machine was in the rise of Putin and the consolidation of Putin. That is a bit the thrust of the novel by Giulia Di Empoli. You know, how important was the myth making?
It's absolutely central, because Putin has, and that's what I'm telling in my book, Putin has raised his popularity amid of the war in Chechnya, which was built around this idea of an enemy who is posing an existential threat to Russia. And it was also a war of propaganda. I cannot go into details on this part in 1999, but just before the starting of the war, he had 2% of popularity, because he was completely unknown as a head of the FSB. And throughout the years and different conflicts, like in Georgia also, the propaganda was really powerful, joining his military action on the field. But with the war in Ukraine, it took like unprecedented scale. And in my book, I demonstrate and I explain how this war is built on a lie, on propaganda, on a myth, the myth that he has put forward just these days on the summit in China, saying that you mentioned it, that it's not the Russian aggression against Ukraine that is the start of the war, but a Nazi coup promoted by the West, which just is completely not what happened in Ukraine on Maidan in 2014. It was a pro-European revolution, and it was not what Putin is saying it is.
Boris Bondarev, Vladimir Putin becomes prime minister in 1999, becomes president in 2000. It's 2025, a quarter century later. How central is this character of this political strategist, Vladislav Surkov, in the mindset that Putin has and that Russia has today?
Well, Vladislav Surkov was very instrumental in consolidating the power in the hands of Putin and his close entourage, there is no doubt. But he was not the only one. He was not this wizard or whoever. He didn't make any miracles. He just was doing his job, and his job as the deputy chief of the presidential administration was to strengthen control of the Kremlin over the Russian domestic affairs, domestic policy. And he invented this term sovereign democracy, which is still in use. So to speak, Russia is a democracy. Russia has all democratic procedures like regular elections and other things, but it's not that democratic as in Europe or in the United States because we have our own democracy, sovereign democracy, which reflects Russian specifics and all these things. That's why we have only two presidents. And we don't need any more, I think, new presidents, as Vladimir Putin may think now. So yes, Vladislav Surkov was an author of some pretty useful concepts which were used at the time. But now I think he's pretty much forgotten. And there are new people who do his job now. And as I said, he was instrumental in that time. Then he was out of use.
These new people, are they about the method, the sophisticated methods in which you get your message across, or are they about the content, about the ideology?
Well, there is no ideology in Russia. The only genuine ideology is to keep power forever. And all these things like Russian world and this sovereign democracy and all just labels because you cannot sell this true ideology to the people. You cannot sell it to your electorate, even in Russia, even to the electorate that is under the spell of very powerful propaganda. They just won't buy it. They won't buy it. This simple concept that we, as Putin's people say, we and our children, our grandchildren will live in the most luxurious life ever, and you will be doing whatever it's necessary to provide this luxurious life to you. So it's not sellable, right? So there are a lot of labels, and Surkov was one of a very lucky author to have come up with some of these labels. There are other guys like Sergei Kiriyenko, who is now in the place of Vladislav Surkov. He's making other things. He's coming up with new labels. He's promoting this Russian world in Donbass and some other regions. But still, there is no such thing as a true ideology in Russia, in political sense, like it was in Soviet times.
Craig Kapitas, you were a Moscow correspondent in the waning days of the Soviet Union. Was there an ideology then?
Yeah, the ideology is that Russians have a cursed capacity for allowing their leaders to make them suffer. Look,
Fatalism.
Fatalism, mysticism, the use of the church. Russia's great asset is that it has a long-term memory. Europe has a short-term memory, and sometimes I think America doesn't have any memory at all. This all gets very confusing for most of our listeners. I mean, I will admit that. We're hearing a lot of names that people have never heard before that are difficult to pronounce. Russian is a very difficult language. I would advise everyone who is watching tonight to read George Kennan's long telegram written in 1946. You can find it on the web. This is you can't tell the players without a program document. And too many leaders in the West, in America and Europe and elsewhere have forgotten about George Kennan's long telegram of 1946.
But hang on, getting back to your previous point, there's no ideology, but there is a long-term memory.
A very long-term memory in Russia, going back to Ivan the Terrible, and the use of the Russian Orthodox Church, which Kennan points out, as you pointed out, as part of this propaganda. Look, the Russians use propaganda for negative and destructive reasons. You can see this historically, and the way they get the West, the way they niggle us, is, and again, Kennan points this out, it's not just me, is they will participate in everything. You name a group, an organization, they're going to join it, not only to increase their own power, but to dilute the power of others. And that's what we're seeing right now in these so-called peace negotiations in Ukraine. When you see the foreign minister, Lavrov, go to a summit meeting with the President of the United States wearing a T-shirt that says Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. I'm sorry, the Soviet Union empire did not die. It's alive and well.
All right, let's talk about that. There we see the image of Sergei Lavrov arriving in Anchorage, Alaska, more than 2 weeks ago. He said, Manlio Graziano, that what's at stake there is history and has to be preserved, even with humor. So he's saying you're taking this all too seriously.
Yeah, I think.
What did you think when you saw CCCP?
I was not surprised because, in my opinion, Russia today and the Soviet Union yesterday and the Russian Empire, even before, are the same institution, the same country, and the same empire. Stalin was able to rebuild the Russian Empire, even bigger than it was before. And so I'm not surprised that nationalists in Russia dream of the rebuilding of the Soviet,
but when you see
the Russian Empire.
When you see the foreign minister wearing a sweatshirt that says CCCP,
of course I laughed. I laughed, but I was not surprised.
What is the message he's sending there?
Exactly what I said, that we want to rebuild the empire. Exactly the same.
Take it at face value? You agree with that, Elena Voloshin?
Yeah, I completely agree. In the new Russian historiography, you have not one but two big catastrophes, which are the two falls of the two empires, the Russian Empire in 1917 and the Soviet Empire in 1991. Speaking about the ideology, first of all, Surkov, he played a central role in 2014, and you can find them on internet, the Surkov leaks that shows the dozens of email that was exchanged between his cabinet.
Just to remind our viewers, 2014 is when there's the Maidan revolution in
and
Kyiv.
the invasion of Ukraine with the annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass. And they were trying at that time already to invade Kharkov, to invade Odessa. They did not manage because the pro-Ukrainian population was too strong in this region. But you have all these emails that are showing that they were trying to use proxies to have these protests against the so-called coup d'etat, Nazi coup in Kyiv, etc. So he really played a central role in organizing these fake puppet republics in the eastern Ukraine. Speaking about ideology, it reminds me of what former KGB officer Alexander Litvinenko said before his death in an interview. As far as I remember, it was to Radio Free Europe, when he said the KGB could not survive without ideology. And for years and years and years, you would have Russian conservatives pushing for the state for years to make Putin's regime appear as democratic. They were pushing a harsher speech than the regime was, whereas they were just pursuing the same line. And they were saying Russia should have an ideology. It's just impossible to exist without this. And it all started in 2012. And in 2020, it ended up by reforming the constitution, in which was inscripted the idea of God, the idea of historical heritage, the idea that Russia was a millennial civilization with traditional values for family, etc. So you have two schools today between analysts. The ones that say, no, Putin is still the same cynical KGB agent that it was, and all his story with ideology and values and so on is completely cynical. And I'm defending in my book another theory, which is that Putin, with years, got himself to be inhabited by this idea of white imperialism, of saint war, etc. Because if we remember in 2004, and I will end with this, he got repatriated from Switzerland, for example, the corpse of Ivan Ilyin, who was the ideologist of the Russian fascism in 1948. So I think that with years, he really, because you should not underestimate ideology, because ideology forges determination, and determination is something that ends up by
So let me just
having a war
let me
in
just be
Europe.
clear on this, Elena. You're saying that the man who was a KGB agent in Leipzig back in the 1980s, he wasn't an ideologue. He was a
No,
foot
completely
soldier.
not. Of course, no.
But something changed while Putin was in power.
Yeah, I think that it's been, it's been 25 years that he's doing his job, and it's to drive someone
ideology
like
is very
kind
important.
of crazy. And I think like seeing today when you have like a Congress of called Sabor with Putin between two images of Christ and everyone praying to him and him saying that he's going to save humanity from LGBTs, I think like there is a ideology there, and it cannot be like only cynical. I think he's went just crazy with it.
Boris Bondarev, do you agree?
I can say that this ideology, of course, you cannot stay the same if you are for 25 years on the throne of Russia. Yes, it makes you change personally, of course. And when he was appointed in 1999, he was, well, very much unprepared for his role because he had no team, he had no real vision, no program, nothing. So now, of course, after 25 years in power, he must be, to some extent, different person, of course. And when you have power and you have no plans to relinquish it, to hand it over to anybody else, and if you are so much concerned about keeping this power in your hands, of course, it's very tempting to convince yourself that you don't do it just for yourself. Yes, it's not your egoistic goals, because you are entitled, to protect Russia. You must show Russians the right path into future or something like that. Of course, people always tell themselves that they must do something because of higher ideas, to do something idealistic rather than to accept the truth. Then you just do it because you want it, you like it. That's it. And then if it happens for some time, you can really believe in it. And I think now Putin, he believes in himself, and he believes that he cannot go away, he cannot leave power, he cannot hand it over to anybody else, because he is the one who can save Russia from whatever threats he can perceive.
Boris Bondarev,
Yeah.
the polling done throughout his presidency shows he's very popular in Russia, and the Russians believe in Vladimir Putin. Do they also believe in the greater Russia, in the mystical shroud of the Russian Orthodox Church that surrounds his push for expansionism? Do they believe in that stuff?
No, people in Russia don't believe in anything, really. They don't. Okay, for instance, I live now in Switzerland, and I meet with some local people. And when I would talk, and they say, "Oh, next year we are planning to have our holiday somewhere," and I am very much surprised, because we in Russia we never plan for such a long time. We can plan only what we do tomorrow, and not always. We live from morning until tonight. Tomorrow is another day, and there will be another world, another reality. So the planning horizon for Russians is very, very short.
So why do they believe in Vladimir Putin, according to these polls?
Well, they don't, because he's the only politician in Russia. He's the president, of course. He's on top of this pyramid, and if you ask them who is the most, important person in Russia now, everybody will say Putin, because he is, and because there is no alternative. There is only Putin, and some other system opposition people, like Communist Party, like some other puppet parties. They are just puppets. They are just clowns. Nobody takes them seriously. Like nobody takes Dmitry Medvedev seriously in Russia, unlike in the Western countries. But Putin is one of the main pillars of Russian society today, and it's a traditional. Yes, and I agree that in some regards, Russia today is very much like to the imperial Russia before 1917, when also it was very, very unjust and unfair society, and a lot of people, most of people, felt that only one figure on the top, like the Tsar or Emperor, can be a protector of them. So now Russians need someone to whom they can address the situation of utter, catastrophe. And so long Putin is on top, he will be, as you say, this person whom they believe. But it's not like they believe, and it's not like they are going to save him from something. They are not going to take to streets if Putin says, I'm in danger, people, please save me. Just like nobody took to streets in 2023 when Evgeny Prigozhin was marching on Moscow, right?
You mentioned Tsars. Last week, fiery Russian talk show host Vladimir Solovyov repeated his call to keep on going after Kyiv and march on Paris. Turns out that's happened before, when the Tsar's troops overran Napoleon's armies and forced the first of his two resignations and exiles back in 1814, Craig Kapitas.
Dawn, March 31st, 1814, flocks of Parisians climbed Montmartre, which was then called Mont Napoleon. They looked out, and there were 63,000 Russian troops, primarily Cossacks, coming at the city. They fled. Some 6,000 Russian troops were killed during this battle for Paris. The Russians who came in had been taught two words in French: brûlez Paris, Paris burn, Paris burn. Frightened the hell out of the citizens here. Napoleon, well, he scrambled to Fontainebleau, and according to those with him, what he was saying the entire way was, Cossacks, les Cossacks bêtes. The Cossacks are beasts. So the Russians come in. They're here for 2 months. They camp on the Champs-Élysées, the Bois de Boulogne, and actually came as far as where our studio is right now. And they pretty much destroyed the city. The prostitutes had a great time. A lot of bars were destroyed, according to the history books. But the Tsar, the interesting part, Alexander I, the Tsar came with them. And he kind of tamped down their irrational exuberance to burn down Paris. And he instead sent them on a mission. And that mission was to build a Russian Orthodox church on the Place de Concorde, which was supposed to sanctify Paris for Russia and Russians for all time. Now, back in my day in Russia, at the old Dollar Bar, at the in-tourist hotel where they served Heineken if you had hard currency, many times I heard Russians there giving the toast, next year in Paris, next year in Paris. And guess what? We now have, thanks to Sarkozy, a Russian Orthodox church that doubles as a spy center right across the river from where we are.
Yeah, it's along the left bank towards the Eiffel Tower, and it's thanks to a 170 million euro deal that Sarkozy sold the Moscow, the prime real estate that became the Russian Orthodox Church there. In an unusual step, Moscow even obtained, this is what Craig was referring to, diplomatic immunity for what it's called a spiritual and cultural center, declaring it the official chapel of its Paris embassy. Manlio Graziano, everybody in Paris walks past that edifice these days. You heard Craig Kapitas describe it as a listening post for the government. It's a church though, but it's got the same status as the Vatican or an embassy.
Americans after World War II were saying that their best listening post was the Vatican in Rome. So I'm not surprised that a church can become a listening post for everybody. I mean, if you need it, the church is a very good place to do that. I wanted to say something, except the idea that they left the bistro, right? The Russians in Paris when they arrived.
In 1814.
Exactly.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, okay. So they left something at least.
They also, when they destroyed all the bars, which were made of wood, you could look this up, historians recount the reason we have zinc bars in Paris was because they put a coating of zinc metal on the bar because they were destroying the bars.
Okay, but fast forward to 2025, Elena Voloshin, how much of a design on Paris do Russians really have? Do they really want to march to Paris, or it's just talk?
No, they don't want to march to Paris because we already have Marine Le Pen. So they don't really need to march towards Paris. But it's true, to be more serious. And by the way, let's not talk only about Paris, because I'm just back from Russian Orthodox Church in Nice, and Russia also is just retaking some new churches there in the Côte d'Azur. Russia is in a strategy of not military invasion in European countries, at least if we don't talk about Baltic countries, because there we don't know. But in Central Europe, the strategy is that one of the states change and power and our authorities change, even when it goes to the level of local authorities, like, for example, in the landers in Germany. This is their strategy, because it's the Putin strategy, because he wants to have as much political governments loyal to him as possible. And when we see the vote against the resolution labeling Russian action in Ukraine as an aggression in the UN at the beginning of this year, who would vote against? It was Northern Korea, China, the United States, Israel, and more countries loyal to Russian narrative. And we see that more countries join the BRICS, and more countries are in the Shanghai Cooperation
So why is it
Organization.
working? Why is it working?
It's working because of, first of all, ideology, also because this nationalistic, far-right, conservative politicians, they don't see world as a space where international law should prevail, where human values should prevail, where democracy should win. They just want, like Donald Trump, for example, they want an authoritarian state with power and with these ideas of the far-right conservatism. So this is why it works, because it's a... And we end up by having what Putin is saying we are having is a civilizational war. It's a war of values. It's a war of humanism, democracy against the re-establishment today of authoritarian, patriarchal, conservative, retrograde, and maybe sometimes fascist regimes.
Manuel Graziano, this civilizational war, it's an appealing concept in the West?
I think it lost steam since the book written by Samuel Huntington in 1996. So I don't think that it's exactly what where the problem is. Problem is the fact that the societies, let's say in the West, because I should say many things about the West, because I don't think that the West exists really. But they are in decline, and they are in decline, and decline means that you are losing something, and when you are losing something, you want to be protected in any way. And so the first who proposes something that seems to be able to protect you, they choose them. So these populists, we can call them populists because they say what the people want to listen to. These populists don't have any kind of problem in lying openly about what they wanted to achieve, because they perfectly know the people who understand what they say, because there are people who don't understand what they say. But the people who know what they say don't believe in what they propose, but they propose because they win the elections with that. Because people vote for them, because people want to be protected. And in Russia is more or less the same things. What Mr. Bondarev was saying is exactly that. Putin is the shield of Russians. So they love Putin because they think that Putin is protecting them from they don't know what, because actually nobody knows what is the real danger in a society in decline.
What J.D. Vance said in Munich, the danger is not Russia, the danger is the politicians who prevent people from praying in churches against their dead fetus during abortions.
They say whatever they want. It's not a problem for them. And by the way, just to come back to the beginning of the discussion, I don't think that what Putin thinks really is very important. I don't think that what Bush was thinking when he invaded Iraq was really believing in that. What is important with these guys is what they do, not what they think.
Putin's narrative is drawing true believers in the West and those who say there are good people on both sides. Like last week, when Russia pounded Ukraine's capital, including the city center of Kyiv. The White House was asked for President Trump's reaction.
He was not happy about this news, but he was also not surprised. These are two countries that have been at war for a very long time. Russia launched this attack on Kyiv, and likewise, Ukraine recently dealt a blow to Russia's oil refineries. They have taken out, as a matter of fact, 20% of Russia's oil refinery capacity over the course of their attacks throughout the month of August.
So you talked at the beginning of the show, Craig Kapitas, about Americans having no memory. Is that simply ignorance of the facts when the White House spokesperson equivocates between Kyiv and Russia? Or is it, as Elena Voloshin was mentioning, a tinge of, well, I hate to say it again, ideology on the part of, for instance, the U.S. Vice President?
When it comes to Russia in the United States, and solely Russia, intelligent people have been banned from thinking so not to offend the imbeciles. And there are a lot of imbeciles in the United States. And all of them, again, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, Francois, but they have to go back and read George Kennan's long telegram of 1946. Oh, aren't you all bored hearing me say that? But that is the program of what's going on here for the uninitiated. And it's not only President Trump who has greatly screwed the pooch on relationship with Russia. Clinton screwed the pooch. Bush, too, screwed the pooch. Obama, all of them. Putin has beaten every Russian leader.
American.
Yeah, I'm sorry, American leader. They've just done it because Americans bought into the fact that Russia would and could create a democracy. In fact, back in the Yeltsin years, when I was also there and wrote a book on it, America paid for it. They paid for it. And now we're hearing that there's deals going on for Exxon to get back into bed, for oil exploration in far eastern Russia, in the Sakhalin Islands. I mean, we don't have the time to go into to how the Russians pulled this off, but they were brilliant. The Americans paid for it. The West paid for it. And what Putin is doing now, he's saying to the West, he's saying, we're going to do the Star Wars deal on you. Spend all your money on weapons like you made us do during the Reagan years. That's why the Soviet Union fell. We outspent them. Putin knows that. He's going to do the same thing. He's doing it.
Boris Bondarev, let me ask you, your experience as a diplomat, when you had American interlocutors, did you have people who understood Russia, or were they in the vein of what Craig Kapitas is describing?
In peacetime, it's not that important whether you understand Russia or any other country, because if you can find a mutually understandable language, it's fine. You can strike deals. But of course, even before the war, I've noticed many Western European diplomats and American who were, I would say, too soft on Russian. And Russia's policy, even in 2019, 2020, for instance, in Geneva, I recall, was quite tough and very uncompromising. And we used a lot of consensus rules in some UN conventions to block any decisions that we didn't like. Just one Russia against 150 other countries. And no one stood up and asked why Russia is turning consensus consensus procedure into veto power. Who gives you this authority? No one. And after, I recall, after one session was adjourned totally, then a few European diplomats approached our head of delegation and asked, why you never make any concessions to us? We have given you so many concessions. And then Russian diplomat just smiled and went away. It was very, very eloquent. I say, yes, because you have never You will never get any concessions if you don't ask for it. You know, Russians ask for concessions, and Europe is ripe to give it.
That's right.
And
May I briefly
if I
add?
may just
Boris
come
Bondarev
back to
first,
the
go ahead.
Previous question about why Russian narrative is gaining so many supporters right now. It's to a very high degree, it's because the Western countries, which say we protect our values, our principles, we stand with Ukraine, and as long as it takes, into 2022, in 2025, what Western countries are discussing? How much of Ukrainian lands Ukrainians must give away to aggressor, right? So everybody around see that this very Western civilization, which so boasts about human rights, values, principles, international law, is so weak and weak-willed to protect, to substantially support its claims, that it's no surprise that China, India, all other global south looks that the West is weak. And why should we, be friends with the weak when we can and should be friends with the strong, like Russia, which is strong enough to pursue its policy even through war?
Boris's analysis is on target, bullseye. At the same time, I think it's very important to add that there were boxcar loads of American, Russian specialists who were advising various administrations, Republican and Democrat, not to do what they did, and they didn't follow the advice.
Linda Voloshin, those years that Boris is talking about, those are the years you're in Moscow. Seen from Moscow, does the West seem weak? I mean, you're in the daily fray of the difficulties of life for an ordinary citizen in the Russian capital. They say nothing works, right?
It does, and they were predicting what is happening today quite early in the 2010s years. I remember just one anecdote when François Hollande, the French president, and Angela Merkel, German chancellor, were coming to Moscow to try to negotiate with Putin about the ceasefire in Ukraine amid of the Minsk agreements. They would spend like a night in the Kremlin, and we were waiting for them at the end. And at the end, we were meeting the French ambassador, who was always, very optimistic about the role of Europe, the European security, the France and Germany taking over like the European security project and so on. And at the end of the day, he would just say, but you cannot negotiate with him because he says that he is not part of the war. So, I mean, you cannot. Putin was just saying that Russia is not part of this war, and it's a civil war in Ukraine. So that's it. They were really they're just making fun out of Europeans. The real target and the real threat and the real enemy and the real adversary would always be in the United States. And with Donald Trump in 2020 in the White House, they won. Now this target is eliminated. So now they are targeting with their propaganda and with their demonization speech Europe. But I would say we see what's happening and what Donald Trump is doing towards Ukraine. And Mr. Bondarev was mentioning that today we are just discussing how many land Ukraine will seize. So to me, it's already a defeat of Ukraine, a victory of Russia. The question is of the scale of the defeat and the victory.
Manuel Graziano?
Yeah. This is why I was saying that I don't think that the West exists, because the West is always divided. And they have this particular skill is to use Russia for their purposes. Each one of them, be France, be Germany, be the United States, sometimes one time at least even the Britons, they use Russia for their purposes. And why they are using Russia? Because among all these powers we are talking about, Russia is the weakest one. And so they use Russia because Russia is not a danger. And this is why I was always
Explain what you mean by Russia is not a danger.
It's not a danger because it's too weak. Whenever Russia tries to do more than it can afford to do, it disappears. And this is what I said when the war started 1 week later, when it was clear that they were not able to conquer Kiev. I said, okay, Russia lost the war. It's already done, and I still think that Russia lost the war, unless it is helped either by China or the United States. And everybody was thinking that I was crazy because China was more or less credible, but the United States, nobody was thinking of it. But I was not saying that because I was thinking of Donald Trump. I said that because I was thinking of 1945, when the United States used Russia to divide Europe, because they left Russia to conquer the eastern part of Europe. And this is why they could have this deal with Russia, because it was perfect. In Europe, they had the real competitors. In Russia, they will never have a competitor because Russia doesn't exist in economic terms. So it's not a danger it's not China. It's not China.
I think you have to go back further. You have to go back to Yeltsin and Clinton. I remember an interview I had with U.S. Ambassador Robert Strauss in the 90s, and he said, look, I'd rather give the Russians a few $100 billion now than look at a, quote, fascist-type situation in 30 years' time. And I remember there were people in that room. There were CIA analysts, Russian analysts saying, no, don't give them the money. Why are you giving them all this money? Why are you giving them 51% control in every joint venture? They're going to steal everything. They're going to bite you back. And they didn't listen because they thought Russia was going to go democratic.
For the February issue of The Atlantic magazine, as anti-vaxxers prepared to take the reins at the Department of Health in the United States, journalist Anne Applebaum compared to the moment of the dying days of the Tsars, when mystics like Rasputin first rose to prominence and then became scapegoats. Like the Russians in 1917, we now live in an era of rapid, sometimes unacknowledged change. Economic, political, demographic, educational, social, and above all, informational. We too exist in a permanent cacophony where conflicting messages, right and left, true and false, flash across our screens all the time. Elena, you wrote your book about Russia. Is the blurred lines and the confusing messages and the mixed messages, is that moved west?
Yeah, I was thinking about Rasputin and who was like the spiritual and mystical advisor to the Tsar Nicholas II and his wife, and that some say that he has accelerated the fall of the Russian Empire and the defeat in the war. I don't know if Putin has this kind of... He has Tikhon, his confessor.
But is the Rasputin in Russia or is the Rasputin in the West? That's the question.
That's too much of a difficult question. I will leave it to Craig.
Well, he did. You know, one of Putin's bête noirs was the holy man from Siberia, who Putin sent basically a small army to arrest and detain.
He put it in jail and finish.
Well, that was a big deal. That was a big deal. He was marching to Moscow to dig up devils beneath the Kremlin, and Putin shut him down real quick.
Sorry, just the problem is the decline.
This notion of decline.
1917 was the worst year for the decline of the Imperial Russia. And now we are living the worst days of the decline of the United States. So this is where I see similarities.
And on that happy note, Mario Graziano, we'll have to end it there. I want to
Thank you, Professor.
I want to thank as well Craig Lapidus, Elena Voloshin. Boris Bondarev, thank you so much for joining us from Geneva. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.